Have you noticed that autism always has to have some new cause, a new villain, a new panic, a new thing that pregnant people are told to fear? And if you've ever thought, hang on, how do we actually know that this is true? Or if you've just had a bad gut feeling about something that you've seen claimed on TV or social media, but you didn't know what to do about it, then this video is for you. Hey friends, I'm Mike, a late identified autistic adult, and today we're going to talk about how to spot fake science. I've got a whole debunking bad science playlist on my channel. It's got autism reversal stories, it's got vaccine claims, it's even got autism and telepathy. And it's even a story about autism and broccoli on there, of all things. But what I haven't covered is how I and how you can weigh evidence, how to detect some of the more obvious tricks. These things are skills that everyone can and should learn. Because without them, you are vulnerable to manipulation. You are vulnerable to misinformation and exploitation. Without critical thinking skills, you are at the mercy of whoever shouts loudest, whoever has the fanciest credentials, or whoever tells you what you want to hear. Trust everyone but cut the cards. One of my favourite authors of all time, Carl Sagan, described a kind of mental toolkit for detecting nonsense, or baloney as he calls it, bullshit as I call it. Simple habits of mind that will help you tell the difference between whether a claim is possible, whether it's true, or whether it's intended to mislead you. I thought it would be a really helpful exercise and YouTube video to adapt Carl Sagan's Baloney Detection Kit with some autism on it and apply it to the single biggest piece of research which is used by the RFK Jr. and Trump administration to link acetaminophen use in pregnancy to autism cases. It's the best piece of evidence that they have. It's their foundational evidence. I have made a video on it previously. And also, for balance, a new meta-analysis has been published in the Lancet journal, which found no significant association between prenatal acetaminophen exposure and autism diagnoses when controlling for confounding factors. It's literally a response to the bogus RFK Jr. study. But here's the thing, right? How do we know that it's bogus? I did previously cover the RFK Jr. study back in September, and you should have seen the hate mail that I received after my video dropped. I had all kinds of people calling me all kinds of names and sending me abuse from both sides of the pond, telling me that I'm a wokey and that RFK Jr. is right and that I'm wrong. How can they be so sure of themselves? What we should all do is take a deep breath and pause for a moment, and we can agree to have a consensus, at least, about the tools and the techniques that allow us to separate facts from fiction and truth from lies. And stay tuned to the end, because this is probably the most important video that I'm going to make on my channel. And stim the like button on the video and subscribe if you like more honest science communication content with a sprinkle of autism in your YouTube video feed. Here's the setup we're going to use for this. We're going to compare two big bodies of research. This is the 2025 review using something called the Navigation Guide. It argues that the evidence from 46 studies incorporating data from more than 100,000 participants across multiple countries supports a link between prenatal acetaminophen and autism ADHD and urges precaution. A systematic analysis covering 46 studies sounds very grand and very important, right? It has been heavily promoted in press releases, in headlines, and in politics. And I've covered this paper in a previous video linked in the description below. Next up, we have Study B, which is a January 2026 systematic review. It's brand new, it's only recently dropped. It's also meta-analyses published in the Lancet Obstetrics, Gynaecology and Women's Health journal that says that when you prioritize the strongest designs, especially sibling comparison studies, that there is no evidence of a clinically important increase in autism, ADHD, or intellectual disability with paracetamol, that's acetaminophen, Tylenol, I use the terms interchangeably in this video. If you use those things correctly, as directed, there's literally nothing, there's no connection. So how can the public be told strong evidence of harm and also no clinically important increase? Both of these two things are opposites. They cannot possibly both be true. And they're both from big detailed studies. So what do we do? How do we know? This is where the bullshit detection kit comes in. And here's the good news. The claim Tylenol causes autism is a really good claim. It's actually a testable claim. It's a decent hypothesis because it can be proven or disproven or falsified. It's different to other claims that aren't disprovable, such as, everything happens for a reason, or God works in mysterious ways. Now, these claims would be unfalsifiable claims. They can't be tested. They aren't scientific hypotheses. Act 2, the Baloney Detection Kit. Tool 1, who benefits? The first tool is to ask yourself, who stands to gain if I believe this claim? Study A, the one RFK Jr. is promoting, has been heavily promoted by groups pushing for product bans and regulatory changes. Some of the authors of the paper have testified in litigation against the manufacturers. This study was led by researchers who have been actively involved in advocacy and litigation. Several of the paper's authors have served as expert witnesses in lawsuits against manufacturers of paracetamol products, where they have testified that prenatal exposure causes neurodevelopmental harm. The senior author, Dr. Baccarelli, disclosed that he served as an expert witness for the plaintiff's legal team in Tylenol-related litigation about general causation. In plain English, he was paid by lawyers to argue in court that Tylenol causes autism. That is a very different job description than just an independent scientist trying to uncover the truth. While this doesn't actually automatically invalidate their research or their work, it does represent a significant conflict of interest that raises additional questions about potential bias in how they selected their data, how they went about their research, how they chose to interpret the results, and how they chose to present it. It absolutely changes how carefully we should interrogate their claims. By the way, I nearly forgot Dr. Baccarelli's court testimony. A federal judge later excluded his testimony from the litigation, ruling that it didn't meet scientific reliability standards. I'll leave that there. The crossover between both the legal and academic systems creates a very perverse incentive structure where finding evidence of harm has direct benefits for the researchers involved. If a researcher can publish an article that supports their litigation in court and all of their lawsuits, it is a conflict of interest on both sides. Study B, on the other hand, was conducted by independent epidemiologists with no financial stake in the outcome. The research was published in a peer-reviewed journal with rigorous editorial standards, and the authors openly acknowledge limitations in the evidence base. Who benefits from me believing this is a really good critical thinking tool that works amazingly well on social media posts too. If you feel something, who benefits? If someone's trying to sell you a supplement, for autism, or a therapy, for autism, or a political narrative, and the evidence that they're citing just so happens to support their product or agenda, that's a flag worth investigating further. Tool 2. Independent confirmation beats prestige. Don't ask, has this come from a fancy journal? Ask instead, do independent teams, using different methods, find the same thing? Prestigious journals, like The Lancet and publishers like Harvard and Princeton universities, well, they are brands, not magical force fields. And don't forget that it was The Lancet who originally published Andrew Wakefield's fraudulent vaccine myth paper with the made-up data. They retracted it years later, but they're not infallible. And a quick callback, by the way, I've covered the whole prestige headlines thing before, where a big name institution publishes something that sounds like it changes reality. Princeton University, do you remember they published a study last year claiming that they discovered 4 new distinct autism subtypes? It was just last year. And the whole internet goes wild. Everyone's posting, I'm subtype A, I'm subtype B, or I'm a bit of C and D. This blew straight through the news as a whole Princeton University discovery, as though they'd not only found evidence of aliens, but also had the aliens over for tea and biscuits. That study was not amazing quality. It was novel. It used machine learning to try and find connections between 2 entirely disconnected data sets. I went into detail in this video, linked in the description. Princeton University Press once published a book filled with nearly 100 spelling mistakes. It's called Cop in the Hood, by the way, if anyone wants to know. But in the case of their 4 autism subtype study, it wasn't the paper itself that was bogus. It was kind of like a but it was actually the university's PR department's handling and promotion of it. They started making PR claims that actually the paper didn't support. So what would strong evidence look like if it's not one university just feeding 2 different spreadsheets into an AI model? Good question. Well, the strongest independent confirmation into autism and prenatal acetaminophen exposure came from the Swedish nationwide cohort study published in the journal JAMA in 2024. It involved nearly 2.5 million children and found that the models, without sibling controls, showed small increased risks, but when comparing matched full siblings, there was nothing. There was no increased likelihood of autism or ADHD or intellectual disability. It is possible, by the way, to show evidence that paracetamol, Tylenol, and acetaminophen causes autism if you want to cherry pick. Those papers are out there, but their data, their results just fall away when independent teams use better study designs that control for these unknown variables, these confounding factors like family genetics or shared environment. And this is why the Swedish sibling comparison study is so important, because it shows that the apparent link that some researchers found just disappear when you account for factors that run in families. If acetaminophen truly caused autism, you'd expect to see the effect persist when comparing siblings who share the same genetic background and family environment, and it doesn't. This tool is incredibly practical. It's useful in our everyday lives, every day. Social media again. On social media, when you see a dramatic health claim shared widely, whether about autism or vaccines or diets or miracle cures or gut biome or whatever, don't just accept it because it went viral or it was on a famous podcast or whatever. Or maybe it came from your favorite YouTuber. Ask yourself, have independent researchers using different methods and populations found the same thing? A single study, no matter how prestigious the institution, is not enough. Look for replication. For autism studies, one of the big red flags that come up time and time again is that the authors are trying to sell something. They want to sell you supplements, or they want to sell you detox diets, or some woo. Drinking secrets. There's a quiz, but quick, it expires in 14 minutes and 40 seconds. We better not think too hard. They run a tight sales funnel here into a quiz, which then gives you a unique boilerplate report, and then they've got your contact details for their one-to-one coaching. You too could follow in the footsteps of these folks with episodes like Autism is Treatable. Take a stand for your child with chiropractic. I think that one's especially funny. Stem cells promote neurorestoration. Review the science yourself. Biomagnetism is that powerful. Nature's remedies work. The authors of the Autism Reversal Twin Studies paper wanted to sell detoxes, like 5G screening, pseudoscientific lab tests. I mean, God knows what they're actually doing with the samples they took from the children. And supplements and courses aimed at autism moms. Their paper was just marketing material, a sort of social proof for their claims. But nobody independent has or can verify any of their claims because they just made them up. You need to ask, is this finding isolated or has it been independently confirmed? It's one of the most powerful questions that you can ask in the age of misinformation, this current timeline that we find ourselves in. Tool 3, chain of argument, check every link. Because if even one link in the chain of argument is weak, a whole chain snaps. Here's the chain of logic from study A. Pregnant people take Tylenol. Tylenol biologically causes neurodevelopmental changes. Those changes increase autism risk, and the effect is robust across populations. It survives stronger controls. Those are the links, okay? That's their claim. Now, watch what breaks the chain. It's something called confounding by indication. This means that people don't just take Tylenol randomly, like they're assigned it in a lab. They take it because they have fever, pain, a migraine, infection, inflammation, whatever, all sorts of real-world stuff. Those underlying conditions can be related to outcomes, which means that the medication can look guilty even if it's just present at the scene, an innocent bystander being blamed for the crime of causing autism. If you do a study and discover that people holding umbrellas are strongly associated with wet streets, you could publish umbrellas may cause street wetness. But umbrellas don't cause rain, Umbrellas are a response to rain. Tylenol is often a response to fever or to pain. So if fever or infection is part of the, risk landscape, Tylenol can be blamed for the weather. Medieval chain of reasoning almost sounds plausible until you examine each link carefully and realise the whole argument is nonsense. This is why observational studies can mislead you. And study A, the one RFK Jr. is reliant on, is heavily reliant itself on other observational studies that don't adequately control for these confounding factors. They compare people who took paracetamol with people who didn't, but they don't account for why those people took it in the first place. If you want to drop correlation does not equal causation into the comment section, or a prediction for how many people are going to say that, now is your time to do it. And while you're there, let me know your favourite emoji in the comments too. The fact that the association disappears in these better controlled studies is strong evidence that the original correlation was just spurious. Study B, however, uses sibling comparison designs that elegantly sidestep this problem. When you compare siblings within the same family, one exposed to paracetamol and one not, you're automatically controlling for shared genetics, family environment, maternal health patterns, and other factors that might confound the relationship. Science, it's just a vibe or a horoscope or something like that. Speaking of magic, if we could, how could we run the perfect trial? Well, we could clone a pregnant person. And then in one timeline, they'd take Tylenol. In the other timeline, they don't, and everything else stays identical. And then we check back later to see which of their babies has autism or not. I mean, look, we can't do that. It would be super unethical. I mean, just imagine the risk of all of those allistic or neurotypical babies. Imagine the horror. So we can't do that, but we can do something close enough to be useful, something called sibling comparisons. Siblings are not perfect clones, but they do share a lot. They share genetics, home environment, socioeconomic context, parenting style, and a big chunk of invisible stuff that we don't know about, unknown unknowns, things that we can't even measure. This doesn't prove that it's impossible for acetaminophen to matter under any imaginable condition, but what it does seriously undercut is the panic narrative that this is a driver of autism. You can always ask yourself, what's the closest thing to a controlled experiment that we have here? If someone claims that a particular policy caused economic growth, you might ask, have they found similar regions or countries where one implemented the policy and another didn't, while trying to control for other differences? And if they haven't, the claim is just naturally weaker because it could be confounded by so many other variables, so many other factors, demographic shifts, economic trends, all that sort of stuff. All kinds of stuff that other YouTubers can explain in better detail than I can. Don't just accept correlation. Ask yourself if the person making the claim has good reason to believe what they do, and if you would believe them too, if you could run the perfect natural experiment. This single question can help you cut through an enormous amount of pseudoscientific nonsense and political spin. Tool 5. Quantify it. How big is the effect? Not, is there a signal, but how big is the signal? Because you can scare people with tiny numbers if you just never show the scale. Here's the statistic from study B that should have just ended the panic on contact. In sibling-controlled analyses, the autism association is about 0.98. That's odds ratio or hazard ratio of around 0.98. And what that basically means is no clinically important increase, as they say, and very likely just noise. It's a null effect. If somebody tells you this causes autism and the best study design gives you a 0.98 score, that's not a cause, that's just a rounding error with a PR team. That's not even a crumb at the bottom of a packet of crisps or chips. In everyday life, quantifying effect size is one of the most practical critical thinking tools that you can develop. When I was researching my video on the happiness pie, do you remember that one? It's the video with the opalite beads. I found that nearly all sources saying that 50% of happiness is genetic, 10% circumstances, was saying that 40% of the happiness pie was within our control. But when I dug into the research and the various follow-up articles written about it, it seems that the percentages were essentially fabricated. The 40% happiness slice that's within our control, the good news is that there is a slice within our control, but it's more like 5%, not 40%. And I still think a 5% happiness buff is worth chasing, and the evidence-based techniques in my video, linked in the description, are all sound, but the effect is much smaller than originally advertised, I'm sorry to say. This tool is really helpful to help you see through sensationalism and make informed decisions based on actual magnitude of effects, not just whether an effect exists at all. Tool 6, Occam's razor, simplest sufficient explanation. If 2 explanations fit the data, you should always prefer the one that requires fewer new assumptions. Let's take 2 hypotheses, reasonable ones, not simplified strawmen, and see what Occam's razor can do for us. Explanation A. A common over-the-counter medication has a hidden, population-wide neurodevelopmental toxicity that somehow shows up in messy observational work, but disappears when you control for family-level confounding. Explanation B. The association is largely explained by confounding, like fever, pain, infection, genetics, healthcare use patterns, and other family-linked factors. Which of these 2 explanations requires fewer miracles, or fewer logical chain-of-thought leaps? It's also valuable in political discourse when evaluating policy claims, for instance, whether a particular economic intervention worked. Ask yourself whether the evidence comes from careful analysis with proper controls, or just cherry-picked samples and correlation without causation. Does the claim fall apart when economists use more sophisticated methods to control for confounding variables? The key here is to be suspicious of claims that only survive in the pond of low-quality evidence and low-quality work, the mire. If something can't withstand rigorous scrutiny, it probably isn't true. If you've only recently heard of Occam's razor, or you've just heard of it for the first time here, this is a powerful critical thinking tool that lots of people know about and talk about all the time, but you have to be really careful, by the way, that you don't accidentally cut yourself with it. For Occam's razor to work properly, you need to have 2 explanations that are written fairly and strongly. You can't use a statement like, I don't know, off the top of my head, RFK Jr. is an idiot with a brainworm selected by a bureaucratic orange tyrant wannabe dictator who values self-importance over the well-being of others, who himself was voted in by misinformed and mostly absent electorate. How'd I do? Some of you might reasonably perhaps agree with that statement, but it's not suitable for contrasting against another explanation using Occam's razor. For that, you need 2 well-constructed and fair explanations that both attempt to explain the same data. Only then can we ask which requires fewer assumptions. Tool 7, don't get attached to a hypothesis. There's one more tool in Sagan's kit, and honestly, it's the hardest one to use. Don't get overly attached to a hypothesis just because it's yours. Or to put it more bluntly, just because you want something to be true doesn't make it true. And we have to be honest here, the idea that Tylenol causes autism is seductive to a great many people, not just the people writing that claim who want to make a lot of money in the legal system, but it's quite seductive to a huge swathe of the American population. Because if Tylenol causes autism, then, and autism is this bad thing, then we can just stop taking Tylenol. Problem solved. RFK Jr. makes bank supporting all the lawsuits that his colleagues start to file against manufacturers. It turns a complex lifelong neurotype into a simple safety check. It gives a sense of control. But the universe doesn't care about what we want. When you look at the best evidence, like there being no link between vaccines and autism, or no link between Tylenol and autism, you have to then be willing to let go of the simple answer hypothesis. If you find yourself getting angry at a study because it didn't find a toxic link, that's a sign that you've stopped doing bullshit detection and you've started doing bullshit protection. You're protecting the story that you prefer from the data that contradicts it. If you only take one thing from this video, take this. Science is not a vibe. It's not about who sounds confident. It's not about who has the fanciest institution behind them. It's a method for making ourselves less wrong over time. And autism research is unusually vulnerable to moral panic because society seems to be desperate for a simple cause, someone to blame, and desperation levels, particularly in the United States, for an expensive set of therapies, say, such as the multi-billion-dollar ABA industry, well, they're desperate for a simple prevention or behavior reduction story to justify their prices and services. It's your fault, for example, that your child has autism, so now you have to pay for our services. You know what I mean? That's not the case at all, but there is a driver for wanting it to be true. Autism is not a single factor story. It's a complex neurodevelopmental condition, and pregnant people deserve healthcare guidance based on the best methods, not on the scariest headline. So next time a study so-called proves the new cause or cure of autism, pause, open the kit, and ask, who benefits from you believing the claim? What's the design? Where are the confounders? Does the effect survive the strongest test? Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And if someone claims that they found the cause or cure of autism, they have to show robust, independently verified, peer-reviewed evidence, not just anecdotes, correlations, or preliminary findings. That is how we know what we know. I'm going to add an extra tool in here. Tool 8. Beware of gold standard branding. And this one is directly from me, and it comes from my experiences in producing my massive ABA documentary film last year. One of the most common ways that I've seen people try to pull the wool over your eyes and deceive you around autism, but it applies elsewhere too, is with prestigious sounding phrases like gold standard or citing a prestigious institution. Princeton University scientists say is a good one, or citing a framework as though it means that all due diligence must have been done. When they say navigation guide, oh, well, they're following good framework. The navigation guide is a structured framework, but it's limited because it's reviewing largely observational studies, and observational studies can be beautifully done and still get fooled by confounding. The navigation guide sounds scientific and rigorous, but it's just a framework for reviewing studies. It doesn't magically transform weak observational data into strong causal evidence. Similarly, just because a study comes from a prestigious university doesn't mean its methodology is sound or its conclusions are justified. Or PR departments and terrible science journalists reporting on papers making claims that the papers themselves don't support or never said. The researchers never said these things. Always look past the branding and ask, what's the actual quality of the evidence? A beautifully packaged claim is still just a claim until it's supported by robust, independently verified data. Oh, and top tip, if you're a parent with an autistic child and you're looking at ABA clinics, you might want to give my ABA documentary a watch. Or if you only have 5 seconds to make a decision, just avoid any clinic that uses the text gold standard on their website homepage. They are lying to you before you've even contacted them. Avoid. Now, appeal to authority is not science, but what regulators actually say does matter because they're forced to be precise in ways that political organisations and departments are not. In September 2025, the FDA acknowledged that many studies describe an association, but also says that a causal relationship has not been established. Now that's regulatory language for interesting, but not enough to rewrite medical practice. Earlier this month, the American College of Medical Toxicology responded to the controversy, saying that the preponderance of evidence shows no association nor causal link between Tylenol and autism. And in everyday life, this tool translates to, what do the experts, whose job it is to be careful, actually say? Regulatory bodies like the FDA, MHRA, or EMA are forced to be precise and cautious because their recommendations will directly affect public health policy and medical practice. They can't afford to be sensationalist or jump to conclusions based on weak evidence. Organisations that tend to err on the side of caution, they'd be boring, but cautious. When they say that a causal relationship hasn't been established, that is a significant signal. This doesn't mean that the regulatory bodies are infallible or that we should blindly trust authority, but it does mean that if somebody's making a dramatic health claim that contradicts what the regulators, who are supposed to be cautious, say, you should ask, what evidence do they have that the regulators don't? So this tool is particularly useful when evaluating health scares or miracle cures on social media. If your uncle shares a post or a Thanksgiving dinner, makes a comment, that a common household product causes cancer, check whether the relevant regulatory body actually says the same. If the FDA or your country's equivalent hasn't issued a warning, despite having reviewed the evidence, that is a strong indication that the claim is just overblown or unsupported. And the same applies to supplement marketing. If someone claims that their product cures or prevents a specific disease, check whether regulatory bodies have approved that claim. In most countries, supplements can't legally claim to treat diseases unless there's robust evidence. So if somebody's making that claim anyway, they're likely either breaking the law or misleading you on purpose. Pregnancy already comes with a never-ending list of don't you dare, don't eat this, don't drink that, don't stand near a microwave, don't breathe near a scented candle, don't think a stressful thought for a moment, don't exist incorrectly. Avoiding paracetamol can also create risk because the untreated fever and severe pain, well, they're not exactly benign and harmless. When a viral claim adds, oh, and you might have also just caused autism by treating a fever, that's not misinformation, that's actual clinical harm. This video is not medical advice. Your clinician is your clinician. Fever and pain in pregnancy have real risks and require real management decisions. The best available evidence does not support the claim that prenatal acetaminophen is a meaningful cause of autism. There is no link, basically. And if someone is selling certainty or selling panic, run this bullshit detector kit. If you like, I'll do a follow-up where we'll build a printable Autistic AF bullshit detection checklist that you can use for any science scare. I actually might do that one anyway. It could be a really useful exercise for the next study to drop, and goodness knows, they're out there. There's new ones dropping all the time. And there's always something in the pipeline from the puzzle piece autism disease brigade. And if you like this style of content, evidence-based, neurodiversity affirming, and allergic to nonsense, please stim the subscribe button. I'm going to recap the bullshit detector now. Before we go, I'm going to recap the bullshit detector. First, independent confirmation beats prestige every time. Substantive debate means checking incentives and conflicts. The guy who's making the big claim one day might be selling something the next that he needs you to believe the claims. Quantify the claim because magnitude matters. Don't say, oh, there's a 0.02% chance of autism, Tylenol causing autism. That's not how that works. That's just a rounding error or noise. Chain of argument breaks if confounding breaks it. If she weighs the same as a duck, she's made of wood, and therefore a witch. Yeah. Occam's razor prefers boring explanations that fit the data. Falsifiability demands tests that could prove the claim wrong. Don't get attached to a hypothesis just because it feels emotionally satisfying. And anyone citing gold standard with respect to autism, ADHD, or selling treatments or therapies is a yellow flag. If it's gold standard and ABA, it's a red flag. It's a sea of red flags. And if this video helped, let me know how you got on by saying I ran the kit in the comments. And if you're a parent who's been carrying guilt from this panic, I want you to hear this clearly. You don't get to blame yourself based on a viral headline. You deserve better evidence than that. The video you should watch next is my debunking of Study A in detail, literally shortly after it dropped. It's a low edit, rapid turnaround video, and I've added a playlist of science debunking videos in the description below if you'd like to keep watching more on this topic. It's not all politics, it's the science one. Bye.